General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael had always believed that the worst betrayals were the ones that came from enemies, from the shadows outside the family circle, from those who raised their weapons openly. But nothing in his life had ever prepared him for the moment. He discovered the truth about Drew, truth that struck him harder than any blow, truth that hollowed him out from the inside the second it slipped into the open. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an enemy. It was Willow. Willow, the woman he once vowed to protect, the mother of his children, the figure he spent years trying to elevate above the chaos and violence of Port Charles. And yet, she had become the very thing she swore she would never be, the architect of someone else's destruction. The revelation didn't come like a lightning strike. It seeped into Michael slowly, piece by piece, through whispers, inconsistencies, medical reports, and finally one chilling confession delivered not through guilt, but through exhaustion. Drew's injury had never been an accident. The bullet that tore through him came from Willow's hand, and the poison that later sent him spiraling into a catastrophic stroke had been administered with precision rather than panic. The kind of precision Willow should never have possessed. The kind that only emerges when someone crosses a threshold they can never return from. Michael felt the ground tilt beneath him. For a moment, he believed he might turn her and drag her straight to the police station, force her into accountability, watch the justice system do what he could not. But then Willow said something that froze him in place. She hadn't done it out of fear or jealousy, or some emotional storm she couldn't control. She did it to protect him, to eliminate someone who had become a threat to Michael's future, Michael's children, Michael's stability. Drew, in Willow's eyes, had become an obstacle, someone capable of exposing secrets that Michael had fought for years to bury. And Willow, in her twisted logic, believed that by destroying Drew, she was saving Michael. When that realization settled into Michael's bones, something inside him changed. Rage didn't evaporate, but something darker took its place, something colder, more calculating, something that didn't come from grief but from recognition. Willow had crossed a line, yes, but she had crossed it in his name, and that meant he held an advantage he never expected to have: leverage. Instead of turning her in, Michael began to see the utility in keeping Willow's secret buried. After all, people in Port Charles survived not through innocence, but through information, and now Michael possessed the most powerful information of all. He told Willow he wouldn't expose her, wouldn't hand her over, wouldn't tear their family apart through police reports and courtroom battles. But mercy was not what he offered. It was control. He warned her that from this moment on, she would remain far away from Wiley and Amelia, not because she was unfit, not because she was dangerous, though she was both, but because he now had the means to enforce whatever boundary he wanted. If Willow stepped out of line, if she attempted to manipulate the children again, if she tried to use Drew's tragedy to gain sympathy or power, Michael would unleash the truth with surgical precision. Willow, realizing the depth of the trap she had walked into, felt a terror she had never known, a tightening around her lungs as she understood that Michael now owned her fate. She had eliminated Drew to protect him, but in doing so she had placed herself under his control, turning her life into a series of concessions, restrictions, and constant dread. Michael, once her anchor, had become her shadow, a presence that watched, measured, judged. He wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. He wasn't interested in forgiveness. He was interested in ensuring that nothing she touched ever again threatened the fragile world. He was rebuilding for his children, and the more he asserted control, the more Michael discovered something unsettling within himself. Power felt clean. Power felt clarifying. Power felt like justice, even when it wasn't. He began to redefine their interactions not as conversations between two co-parents, but as negotiations between a man holding evidence and a woman living on borrowed time. Willow tried to protest at first, insisting she still had rights, still had a voice, still had some claim to motherhood, but each time she raised her voice, Michael calmly reminded her of the bullet, the poison, the stroke, the life she stole. And with every reminder, Willow crumbled a little further. The psychological imprisonment tightened around her like invisible chains. Every time she passed Wiley's room, she felt the weight of Michael's command. Every time she heard Amelia laugh in the distance, she fought the urge to collapse under the realization that she could not claim them. Not as long as Michael's silence was the price of her freedom. Michael never laid a hand on her, never raised his voice, never issued direct threats. He didn't need to. His control came from the truth, and the truth was far more suffocating than violence. Willow was alive, but not free. She was a mother, but not allowed to mother. She was a survivor, but only because the one man who could destroy her found it more useful to keep her breathing. Yet the darkest part of this new reality wasn't Willow's fear. It was the transformation taking place inside Michael. He had tasted a kind of power he never expected to wield. A power that allowed him to protect his children while punishing the woman who had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. It wasn't forgiveness that held him back from turning her in. It was strategy. And as Willow watched the coldness in his eyes deepen each day, she understood that the nightmare she had created was no longer Drew's legacy. It was Michael's, and it was hers. The new adjustment in Port Charles was not merely a shift in custody, influence, or emotional alliances. It was the birth of a psychological war. One where Michael held all the weapons, and Willow had none. One where silence became a form of blackmail, and motherhood became a privilege she could lose at the slightest misstep. One where every breath Willow took felt like borrowed time, and one where Michael's descent into controlled ruthlessness proved far more terrifying than anything Drew had ever been capable of. The adjustment was here, and it was irreversible. Michael had always believed he understood danger. He had been raised in a world shaped by power, loyalty, betrayal, and blood. He knew what a threat looked like, what manipulation felt like, and how secrets could destroy families even faster than guns or fists. But nothing in his entire life had prepared him for the danger that came disguised as softness, fragility, and heartbreak. Nothing prepared him for the threat that came from Willow herself, the woman he once held as a symbol of purity, the mother of his children, the person he fought to protect long after their marriage had dissolved into silence. And nothing prepared him for the revelation that the greatest enemy to his children's stability might not be the mob or rivals or court battles, but Willow's growing web of lies, power plays, and emotionally unstable decisions rooted in her entanglement with Drew Kane. When Drew first came into Willow's life, Michael sensed something off. Drew had a way of inserting himself into emotional cracks, making Willow dependent on his presence, shaping her fears and insecurities into something he could mold. Michael watched helplessly as Drew's influence deepened, as Willow became more erratic, more distant, more defensive. Through it all, Michael's instinct had been clear and urgent: keep Wiley and Amelia away from Willow before Drew's holdover her dragged the children into something unsafe. That instinct was what drove him to set strict boundaries, to intervene, to step in whenever Willow's behavior drifted into instability. But now everything had changed. Drew was gone, not dead, but incapacitated, locked away within his own unresponsive body, unable to speak, unable to manipulate, unable to continue shaping Willow into a version of herself that terrified Michael. In that sudden vacuum, Michael should have felt relief. The threat should have evaporated. But instead, something far more complicated emerged. With Drew's absence, Willow began to transform, not back into the woman she had once been, but into a version forged by trauma, guilt, secrecy, and craving for power she had never allowed herself to wield. And in this transformation, Michael began to see an opening. Perhaps they could finally co-parent without conflict, finally give Wiley and Amelia a united foundation, finally build a family structure that didn't require the children to choose between homes or emotional loyalties. But Michael also sensed something else, something darker, something that suggested Willow wasn't free from Drew's influence at all. Instead of recovering, she appeared to be clinging to the ghost of Drew, to the control she once allowed him to exert over her, and to the shadow logic that had governed their final days together. She was unpredictable, fragmented, and hiding something behind her trembling apologies and carefully constructed excuses. Michael started to suspect that Willow's connection to Drew had not ended simply because Drew no longer had a voice. And the more he paid attention, the more the truth began to surface. He noticed inconsistencies in what Willow claimed Drew said or did before his collapse. The way her voice shook, not out of grief, but out of fear of being exposed. the way she avoided certain conversations and redirected others, as if performing emotional sleight of hand. It became obvious that Willow knew more than she admitted about what happened to Drew. The thought chilled Michael, because he understood that the woman before him was no longer simply misguided. She was hiding something dangerous. Whether it came from overhearing a whispered confession, piecing together medical anomalies, or catching Willow in one too many contradictions, Michael eventually grasped the full picture. Willow had been controlling Drew. Long before Drew lost control of his own body, she had been manipulating him, influencing him, feeding into his paranoia and anger, and in ways that Michael could not yet fully articulate. She had contributed to the spiral that ultimately destroyed him. Willow had not simply been a victim of Drew, she had been an architect of the final collapse. And perhaps the most terrifying part was that Willow didn't seem to recognize the severity of what she had done. She framed her actions as protection, as survival, as choices she made to shield Michael and their children from Drew's growing instability. Whether this was delusion or deliberate self-justification, Michael could not tell. But what he could tell was this: Willow had become dangerous. And yet, despite all this, Michael did not turn her in. The idea of involving law enforcement, of shattering their children's lives with the explosion of a public scandal, of letting Willow be torn apart by the system that felt like burning down the entire world, simply to extinguish one fire. And deep down, somewhere in a quiet place he refused to acknowledge, a part of Michael still cared for Willow in ways he could not fully explain or eradicate. Instead of exposing her, he made a choice, a calculated, morally gray, deeply unsettling choice. He would keep her secret. He would protect her from consequences. But he would use the truth as leverage to safeguard the children and control the fallout. Michael became both her shield and her captor, her savior and her judge. And as he confronted Willow with the truth, watching her collapse into panic and confusion, he made it clear she would stay away from Wiley and Amelia until he decided otherwise. She would not bring instability into their lives. She would not drag them into the shadows she had created. She would not manipulate, guilt-trip, or weaponize their love. If she tried, Michael would release everything: the truth about Drew, the full scope of her involvement, the emotional and psychological story she had tried to bury. In that single moment, their entire dynamic shifted. Willow, who had once believed she held emotional power over Michael through their shared history and their children, now found herself in a position she had never imagined. Michael held all the power. He didn't need violence or threats. He didn't need anger. He only needed the truth, her truth, to control her completely. And as Willow realized the extent of his leverage, she entered a new kind of psychological imprisonment. She lived in constant fear of Michael's silence, unsure whether it was mercy or warning. She watched him with haunted eyes, waiting for the moment he would decide she had crossed a line. Meanwhile, Michael found himself experiencing a transformation of his own. Protecting the children had always been his instinct, but now he was protecting them with a cold, strategic precision that mirrored the world he came from, the world of sunny Corinthos, where truths were weapons and silence was currency. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself he was saving his children, but he also sensed something darker stirring inside him. A kind of satisfaction in holding Willow accountable. A kind of grim certainty that he had finally claimed authority over a situation that once spiraled beyond his control. And in this tightening spiral of secrecy, power, fear, and reluctant cooperation, something new emerged between them: not love, not reconciliation, but a twisted form of symbiosis. A relationship where both gained something, both lost something, and both lived with the knowledge that one wrong step could destroy them. Their alliance was fragile, dysfunctional, and morally compromised, and yet it worked, at least for now. But beneath every interaction, beneath every forced smile and measured conversation, one truth remained: Willow's connection to Drew had corrupted her, and Michael's new control over Willow was corrupting him in return. It was no longer a matter of whether their arrangement would implode, but when and who would be standing when it did. Michael and Willow had crossed a threshold they could never return from. The moment Michael uncovered the truth about what Willow had done to Drew, how she had manipulated him, pushed him, broken him psychologically until he became a prisoner, Inside his own body, everything between them shifted into a darker, more fragile territory. Now they both understood one thing with chilling clarity. If Drew ever recovered his voice, if he ever escaped the mental cage Willow had helped construct, he would expose everything. He would destroy Willow. He might even destroy Michael in the process. And so a new and dangerous thought began to take shape, unspoken yet unmistakable. Drew had to remain silent, permanently. Not harmed, not eliminated, but contained, controlled, kept in a state where his truth could never be used against them. For Michael, this was not a desire, it was a necessity. His entire life had been shaped by the catastrophic consequences of secrets spilled in the wrong moment. He had seen families shattered, reputations destroyed, lives ended because the wrong person talked at the wrong time. Willow's secret was now intertwined with his own survival and the protection of Wiley and Amelia. If Drew ever spoke, he wouldn't just expose Willow. He could ignite a legal and emotional firestorm that would drown all of them. But Willow wanted something different, something more dangerous. She didn't just want Drew silent, she wanted him gone from her life in every possible way. She wanted the psychological hold he once had over her erased. She wanted freedom from the guilt that gnawed at her every night. She wanted Michael's approval, Michael's forgiveness, Michael's partnership, not the cold transactional alliance they were trapped in. And that desperation gave birth to a new tension, a new adjustment in her mind, the belief that she deserved a clean slate, even if achieving it meant burying the truth deeper than ever before. Michael saw the hunger in her eyes and felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't just fear, it was ambition. Willow was changing, mutating into someone he barely recognized, someone both fragile and frightening, someone who believed she had earned control of the narrative. The more she tasted that control, the more she wanted to rewrite the story altogether. But stories, especially in Port Charles, never stay rewritten for long. And Drew, though trapped in silence, remained the single unpredictable variable in their dangerous game. Because the question no one wanted to ask out loud was this: what if Drew wakes up? What if the fog lifts from his mind? What if his memories sharpen into clarity? What if he recalls Willow's hand, Willow's voice, Willow's control? What if he exposes the truth with a single whispered sentence? That possibility haunted Willow like a ghost. She began checking reports obsessively, his brain activity, his reflexes, minor fluctuations in his condition that most people would dismiss as random neural noise. But Willow saw danger in every twitch, every flutter, every sign that Drew's mind was fighting to surface. Michael, in contrast, tried to remain rational. He told himself that Drew's chances of recovery were low. He told himself that the medical team had no hope. He told himself that they were safe. But even he could not ignore the creeping dread that one day Drew might claw his way out of the prison of silence, out of the place Willow had helped trap him, and reclaim the truth that neither of them was prepared to face. And that thought alone birthed a new form of paranoia, a subtle but undeniable tension between Michael and Willow. Michael's desire was simple: keep Drew contained, monitored, far enough away that he could never interfere but never crossed into irreversible harm. Willow's desire, however, was spiraling into something else entirely. She wanted closure. She wanted certainty. She wanted Drew's shadow gone forever. And that difference, small at first, began to evolve into a dangerous rift. Michael sensed it. Willow felt it. And neither was willing to say it aloud. Their alliance, once rooted in fear, was now rotting from within. The more Willow pushed for a permanent resolution, the more Michael pulled back, afraid her desperation would push them both into irreversible moral darkness. The more Michael resisted, the more Willow believed he cared more for Drew's survival than for her safety. And in that emotional tangle, suspicion took root. What if Michael planned to betray her? What if Willow planned to eliminate Drew entirely? The fear fed itself, growing into an obsession, shaping their every interaction. Every visit to the hospital became a battlefield. Every shift in Drew's condition became a potential threat. Every whispered conversation felt like a test of loyalty. The adjustment taking place between Michael and Willow was no longer simply strategic. It was psychological, emotional, corrosive. Because the truth neither of them could escape was this: as long as Drew remained alive, inside his silent prison, both of them lived under the threat of destruction. And nothing in Port Charles stays buried forever. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe months from now, Drew might open his eyes with clarity. He might remember the manipulations, the betrayal, the moment his mind began to fracture under Willow's influence. And if that day ever comes, the fragile, toxic alliance between Michael and Willow will implode, leaving behind a new kind of horror neither of them is prepared to face. The obsession is growing, the suspicion is rising, and the day Drew wakes will change everything.